This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. The problems we're going to discuss today are extremely complex ones, but the fact that you all managed to find your way down into the dull hall suggests that you have the necessary analytical skills to make a real difference today. I must say I haven't penetrated this far in the Senate House before I looked at the room yesterday. We have a really remarkable programme today. And I'd like to extend my thanks to all the speakers who agreed to participate, and to all of you for coming along. I'd like to thank Daisy Cooper, the Director of the Commonwealth Advisory Bureau, for putting this programme together, and Daisy's colleagues, Stephanie Munro and Rob Kenyon, for helping to finalise the arrangements. We'd also like to thank the Round Table for very generously co-sponsoring this event. The phrase existential crisis has been bandied around in the British media over the last couple of weeks in relation to another venerable institution. It may sound alarmist to apply this to the Commonwealth, which has outlived many earlier premature obituaries. But if anyone doubts that there's something of a crisis of confidence surrounding the Commonwealth, they need only read the report of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, which is published officially this morning. As we expected, the British media, insofar as they have paid attention to this report, and I must say that the coverage has been extremely patchy this morning, which I think in itself should probably be a cause for concern. Insofar as they have covered this report, they've tended to focus upon the recommendation that David Cameron should not attend the 2013 CHOGM in Colombo, quote, unless he receives convincing and independently verified evidence of substantial and sustainable improvements in human rights in Sri Lanka, unquote. This rather startling comment bears directly on two broader findings in the report. That the moral authority, as they put it, of the Commonwealth has too often been undermined by repressive actions of member states, and that the Secretariat, quote, must sharpen, strengthen and promote its diplomatic performance. I should say in passing, although, as we all know, Daisy has her finger on the pulse of politics in the Commonwealth, the timing of this event and of tomorrow's event on Sri Lanka is entirely fortuitous. The tone of the Foreign Affairs Committee's report is all striking, given that I think everyone who had direct contact with it would recognise that its members were broadly very well disposed towards the Commonwealth as an institution. And although we're really just digesting its findings, it's difficult not to contrast this report with the committee's previous major inquiry into the Commonwealth in 1996. Then the tone was unashamedly upbeat, claiming that the Commonwealth was an organisation of vast untapped potential whose time had come. Now the tone is decidedly more cautious, not to say world-weary. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss, and it gives me great pleasure to kick the proceedings off by inviting Daisy Cooper to introduce our first speaker, Senator Hugh Segal. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. Yes, you are speaking. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Excellent. Excellent. Commonwealth Advisory Bureau and the Roundtable to our event today, The Commonwealth in Crisis, Is Reform Possible? I'm chairing this first session, which is entitled Commonwealth Reform, The Challenge Ahead. And I'm delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, Senator Hugh Segal. He has a long and distinguished biography, which is available in the copies at the back of the room, but I won't take up valuable time by reading all of it, simply to say that Hugh was a member of the Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group, whose report was presented to Commonwealth Heads of Government in Perth last year, and Senator Segal is now Canada's Special Envoy for Commonwealth Renewal, and with that briefest of introductions, I'll hand over to you, Hugh.
Daisy, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here, and I was able to find the hall. I was encouraged to understand the meaning of going down into something called the rising down. We don't do that in Canada, but so far, so good. The initiative of the Commonwealth Advisory Board as a freestanding Commonwealth-focused policy unit and the Roundtable, the Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs, in organizing today's event is both courageous and praiseworthy. And let me just pause, and I know I speak for Sir Ronald Saunders, who served on the EPG with me, and the other members of the EPG, in paying tribute to Daisy Cooper, who was in fact our managing secretary, kept everything moving, connected the pieces for many long months all around the world, and did an outstanding job. And we would not have been able to get our job done without the inspiration of her support and, of course, her intellectual integrity, which allows her to say things which may not be pleasant but are always the truth. I am also sad to see that she will be moving on to a focus of activities that are not primarily about the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth will always be in her debt, and the new organization she will be serving will be most fortunate indeed. The Commonwealth, of course, we would have believed in the EPG, is not a secret society, and the process and substance of reform and renewal cannot be treated as a private matter. The more open the discussion, the more broadly it is understood, the more real that reform and renewal will be, and reform and renewal was the substance of our work. The thoughtful concerns of the 2009 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Port of Spain, and I'm delighted that we're honored with the presence of the High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago this morning, that brought about the creation of an eminent persons group to consider the way forward for the Commonwealth should not be understated and cannot be understated this morning. Heads were rightfully troubled about a drift towards irrelevance for the Commonwealth, and they sensed a growing passivity, complacency, and disconnect between the Commonwealth as an institution and reality on the ground for the 2.4 billion human beings who live within its member states. The mandate they gave to the EPG was clear and precise. We were to produce recommendations that would strengthen the Commonwealth, its underlying purpose, and the instrumentality by which a voluntary association of like-minded sovereign states could defend and promote their shared values and make the Commonwealth a more relevant and impactful force for economic development, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and equality of opportunity. Those of us fortunate to have served on the EPG were under no illusions that the task would be either easy or that anything less than pointed, urgent, and defined recommendations would suffice. We too were concerned about the perceived growing irrelevance of the Intergovernmental Commonwealth and the criticisms that it was no longer playing the transformational role for which it was rightly recognized in the past. That the members of the EPG came from different continents, age groups, races, religions, genders, broadly diverse experiences would at first seem to suggest that agreement, consensus, and coherence would be impossible. But when we came together and had our first discussions regarding the Commonwealth and its importance to each of us, the opposite was actually the case. Under the distinguished chairmanship of Tun Abdullah Badawi, Malaysia's former Prime Minister, Dr. Emmanuel Akwati from Ghana, Sami Kaluma from Uganda, the Honourable Michael Kirby from Australia, Patricia Francis from Jamaica, Sir Jeremiah Tabby from Kiribati, Sir Ronald Saunders from Guyana and Barbados, the Right Honourable Sir Malcolm Rifkin from the UK, Dr. Asma Jahangir from Pakistan, and your humble servant from Canada, we experienced what might be called a marriage of minds. And over almost 18 months of meetings in London and Kuala Lumpur, we debated the issues and reached agreement on a series of recommendations. It's important to note that, unlike other Commonwealth efforts of this kind, the EPG members wrote our own report. It was not a draft handed to us by well-intentioned Secretariat officials, a practice which, on the whole, I think has become counterproductive. The report, entitled A Commonwealth of the People, Time for Urgent Reform, represents the unanimous agreement of the 10 diverse EPG members on each and every word and recommendation in the report. It is also significant that each member of the group gave his or her time and effort voluntarily, receiving no compensation for their efforts. They did so because of their commitment to the Commonwealth, their fundamental belief in its enormous potential to make a difference to the human condition for the 2.4 billion people we serve. The recommendation covered the full gamut of our mandate. Among other important points, they were about lifting the Secretary General's horizon and stepping up their game. Importantly, they were also about a Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group engaging on more than just the coup or no coup divide relative to any Commonwealth member's legitimacy as a government or appropriateness as a member. And here the EPG recommendations were very similar to what the outgoing CMAG members had recommended in their report to the Perth CHOGM for upgrading CMAG's future engagements, recommendations that were accepted unanimously. So as a result, depending on how one counts, various amalgamated recommendations, which with the Charter of the Commonwealth were approved by Ministerial Task Force last March, 90 of the original 106 recommendations have been approved and have been sent to heads of government for their consideration. This is a great tribute to those who worked so hard on the Ministerial Task Force that was established in Perth. These were from the governments of Australia, Barbados, Belize, Canada, India, Malaysia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Seychelles, Solomon Islands, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. And if you add those 12 to Ghana, Uganda, Jamaica, Guyana, Pakistan, and Kiribati, who are also represented on the EPG, you can see that the present wave of recommendations for reform and modernization has a very broad base indeed. More than 33% of Commonwealth countries were involved in the recommendations in terms of drafting, consideration, and approval. And following the Commonwealth Foreign Ministers meeting in New York this past September, it is also a tribute to all 54 ministers and representatives who reviewed the Charter and the recommendations and saw fit to pass them on and have them move forward to implementation. As we reach November 30th, with the 54-country consensus still intact, and after almost 2.5 years of work from the first EPG meeting in London, Foreign Ministers meeting in New York, there is no reason, colleagues, for further delay. December 1st is when the job of focused implementation must begin. Any delay in implementation to July would be a serious setback for the Commonwealth and a violation of the Commonwealth's core interests. Without focused implementation beginning as soon as possible, all the discussions, the debates, the hard work of setting out the recommendations, reviewing and agreeing to them will come to naught. Urgent reform is not served by endless delay. Let me step back a moment, share with you my own underlying and deeply held view of the Commonwealth opportunity. If you think of our international organizations in the world, some fall into what I would call the trauma category. NATO, the UN Security Council. When things have become unmanageable, we turn to them for capacity that is defined by treaty and by agreement. But there are other organizations, of which the Commonwealth is one, that can play a very substantive preventive role by encouraging development and education, fighting for democracy and the rule of law, sustaining those standards across the full membership in a cooperative and respectful way. It is the failure of organizations like the Commonwealth that helps produce those trauma events which must then be considered by people like the Security Council at the UN. The Commonwealth is 54 sovereign states, held together not by a binding treaty or contract, but by a series of mutually agreed and proclaimed values, principles, goals, and aspirations that manage not through vetoes or a permanent five, but through consensus, mutual respect, and common aspects of governance and values. Now, to some this may sound unwieldy and awkward, But in today's world, where religious intolerance, the gap between rich and poor, and the battle for democracy and human rights remains difficult and on occasion discouraging, the ability of the Commonwealth to be a force for good, an instrument for improvement, and an ally to all its members in ways that are supportive and not threatening, constructive and not destructive, has never mattered more or been more necessary. Whether instruments for making the Commonwealth matter include the Secretary General's good offices, or technical assistance, or bilateral relationships between Commonwealth countries that underline shared Commonwealth values, depends very much on the circumstance in each country, what works best, and in what form and in what tempo. But at the root of such arrangements must be trust. Trust that governments will strive to maintain Commonwealth values and principles, and that if events occur that knock them from that course, they will turn to other Commonwealth governments for assistance to get back on track. And trust that if they seek such assistance, it will be forthcoming in good faith, inspired by a sincere desire to maintain respect for democracy, human rights, without which nations and people cannot prosper. That flexibility only works and can only be enhanced. The values of the Commonwealth, as expressed in many past declarations and now consolidated in our proposed charter, are stoutly defended, not as impositions on sovereign countries, but as the terms of membership in the Commonwealth itself, for those are the ties that bind. And if the price we pay for defending those principles is a smaller Commonwealth, that is a price worth paying. Because a larger Commonwealth that stands for nothing will serve no purpose and risk its own irrelevance in a very fundamental way. Each member state has every right to have high expectations of the Commonwealth and the measurable value of membership in the organization. By the same token, the rest of the Commonwealth has the right to high expectations of their fellow members. The Commonwealth is not the United Nations, where being a sovereign state with a de facto, if not de jure, government is sufficient for membership. In the Commonwealth, the standards need to be higher, precisely because the only ties that bind are the declared values and principles by which every member states it is bound. So the work on the implementation of the agreed recommendations requires first a serious effort to promote and distribute the Commonwealth Charter through cooperation with all Commonwealth members. Secondly, it requires the governing board of the Commonwealth, consisting of representatives of member governments, to work with the Secretary General and his staff on a focused strategic plan that directs resources to the new priorities in the accepted EPG recommendations. This should imply not only a financial overhaul of the Secretariat, but also a fresh look at constructive funding sources from within and without the intergovernmental network of the Commonwealth. It is a lot of work, but it is vital work. Energy, increased tempo, vision, and sure-footed activism in support of Commonwealth values, outreach, branding, and presence in all the 54 countries is what will maintain and strengthen Commonwealth relevance in the 21st century. Anything less will threaten the Commonwealth's survival. When human rights, fairness, development, democracy, rule of law is in the news cycle, positively or negatively in any Commonwealth region, the Commonwealth as a whole needs to be a constructive part of that narrative going forward. Silence, the EPG declared when reporting publicly of its meeting in Malaysia, is not an option. My friends, there is a difference between discretion and silence. A difference between a watching brief and looking away. A difference between sovereignty and impunity. And in no organization should the dynamic of those differences matter more or speak louder than in the Commonwealth of Nations. From December onward, going along to get along diplomacy has had its place and time. The place for that has passed. It is now no longer relevant or acceptable. What the Commonwealth needs now is the clarity and energy of frank and positive advocacy for its values and principles. If we keep our shoulders to the wheel and take no aspect of implementation for granted, then the recommendations for reform and the charter that have been embraced can become instruments for strengthening the Commonwealth's contribution to progress, social justice, development, economic and investment opportunities, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law for all of our citizens. No Commonwealth country is perfect, Certainly mine is not. The Commonwealth is not about perfection. In fact, it has been my experience in both international and national politics for over 30 years that the perfect can often be the enemy of the good. What the Commonwealth must be about is improvement, that when pursued in any country individually or all Commonwealth countries collectively leads to a better life for more and more of our Commonwealth citizens. We have a lot of work to do together. Colleagues, 60% of our 2.4 billion people are under 30 years of age, and in various measures, in various countries, those younger people represent the greatest number of our unemployed. And the prospects before them do not appear bright. They rightly want a better life, and in the push for a better life, one less diminished by poverty, by oppression, by bigotry, of which the worst kind is the bigotry of diminished expectations. We have much to learn from each other. Every Commonwealth country can and should take lessons from each other's successes, mistakes, knowledge, history, or prospects. I have often heard the warning that no progress forward can be made any faster than the market will bear, and that many Commonwealth countries are averse to progress on the core questions of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. I view this defeatist analysis as self-serving and destructively inertial. That is not what I have found in my Commonwealth travels, Africa, Asia, Europe, Caribbean, what any amongst us should believe, or worse, even accept. The recommendations put forward by the EPG were broad-ranging, covering many areas of concern. Not all recommendations are equally important to all countries. I understand and respect them. And I will add that 100% agreement is not necessary for a reformed and renewed Commonwealth, moving forward being a source of inspiration and cooperation, the kind of collective leadership that ensues when people stretch out their hands and embrace the majestic strength and the massive benefits of diversity. We in the Commonwealth understand that while histories, customs, and societies all have unique aspects and traditions, our common humanity, our Commonwealth of values and principles unite us all. That is the unity through diversity, the common purpose through respect and humanity that can drive the new Commonwealth to the next level of service and engagement the world has never needed more. Let me stress some key reforms that demand our collective engagement. Many Commonwealth members are small states, and recommendations around technical assistance, capacity building, reform of the WTO and IMF to take account of the vulnerabilities and debt challenges of small states must be a focus priority. With the approved broader focus of CMAG relating to its member countries, a realistic human rights tether between the Secretary General's Special Advisor and CMAG, so that CMAG can fulfill its duty as approved by heads in Perth, must be ensured. Real advocacy of women's rights, the education of girls as a human right, and respect for the rights of all Commonwealth countries must be stressed. Focusing strategically on public health relating to communicable diseases and related law reform challenges where necessary is vital. And sharing and promoting democracy's best practices, as well as development expertise across a wide spectrum of South-South, South-North, and North-South skills transfer is an absolute priority. Whether through financial partnership, direct cooperative action with member states, or a mix of public and private advocacy backed up by integrated engagement, this is no time for slowing down the pace. This is the time for all of us who care about the Commonwealth and its role, who worry, as heads did in Port of Spain in 2009, that the Commonwealth might well slip into irrelevance, who understand intrinsically the values at its core, and defend the vital freedom, social and economic rights of its 2.4 billion people to engage, push, advocate, and advance. The Commonwealth needs our collective determination now more than ever, because the world, divided by intolerance, suspicion, unfairness, and fear, needs the Commonwealth with its example of cooperative diversity as it never has before. We must not let the opportunity be frittered or dithered away. We have come too far together to turn back now. Thank you very much.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. This is to the heart of the purpose of holding this conference. The issue of the disconnect between the aspirations of the Commonwealth and the reality on the ground. You talked us through where we are with the reform agenda, particularly where we've got to with the eminent persons group and some of the key reforms that you would like to see taken forward. We now have around half an hour for any questions, if you would like to kick us off. Please, Mark, please introduce yourself as well for those who don't know you.
Yes, of course. Mark Robinson, and Treasurer of the Round Table. You mentioned, and I wonder if you could just elaborate on the importance of not delaying for 6 months. I'm not sure what the background to that is. I've been away, but if you could elaborate a bit, that would be, because it did sound immensely important, but you didn't quite come across as to why it's important.
I'd be delighted. This process began in Port of Spain in the fall of 2009. We sit here, we're now in the fall of 2012. And I would think that 3-year period for putting together the EPG, for the EPG to do its work, to consult broadly, to prepare its report, which was ready almost a whole year and a half ago, and then to begin implementation after we've gone through all the approval processes, Perth itself, and then the ministerial task force, and then the foreign ministers gathering in New York. All those pieces have been addressed. The notion that, for example, the 18th draft of some strategic plan should take us till July strikes me as, not intentional, but as a sin of omission, serious dithering and delay. So I hope that, and this is in the hands of others, and certainly I've made the case to my High Commissioner, and I hope other High Commissioners will reflect on that it is better to begin the process of reform and change with 3/4 of a loaf in hand than to wait until all 4 loaves are fully baked, sliced, toasted, buttered, and jammed to say we now can begin. That's my point. And if we wait all the way till July, I worry that momentum or other events will intervene, and we will lose the purport of the work that's been done, especially by the countries that were part of the ministerial task force and all the foreign ministers who worked so hard on this issue for the meeting that took place in New York in September. So that's what I worry about. And I don't think delay is ever intentional. I think it's become self-justifying. You can always get a better draft. You can always consult one more time. But at some point, you do actually have to turn the engine and the key in the engine rather, and try to make some forward progress. You can't keep on buffing the tires in perpetuity.
Thank you very much, Hugh. A question over here, please. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Derek Lee.
And your association?
Race Equality.
Thank you.
How does racism impact the decision-making processes within the Commonwealth?
Well, I will not, let me not try to, that's a very large question and a very important one. I would say this, certainly in the work of the Eminent Persons Group, certainly in the way in which its core principles were put out in the broad consultation which took place in the Caribbean and in Africa to get the views of our fellow Commonwealth members, there was an effort to ensure that there were no racist biases, implicit or explicit or tolerated in the process. And in fact, the focus on human rights and the rule of law, the focus on advocacy for minorities in any one of our countries of any racial background was quite consistent and very intense. So I don't think that, at least insofar as the work of the EPG was concerned, and the processes that followed thereupon, we were infected by the kind of racist bias that you and I would agree is completely abhorrent. Whether the broader superstructure has other structural and cultural and historical problems is a very legitimate debate, but that's a little bit beyond my remit, at least for the purposes of this discussion.
Thank you. I have another question here. Could you introduce yourself, please?
It's very much related to this.
Could you just introduce your name and organisation?
This is Selvaratnam, Moving for Justice and Peace in Sri Lanka. Poverty is created by oppression. Jaffna people, the northern people are now starving, but they were sending rice and fish to the rest of the country 30, 40 years ago. Now they are starving. Aid agents are even prevented from helping them. The diaspora is prevented from helping them.
I'm sorry, there's a question there. The question is?
This is a common racism persists for years from the time of independence.
Quoting an example for consideration. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, we are having, I think, a full day on Sri Lanka tomorrow, but let me not try to avoid your question. Let me try to put it in the broader context. It was very much the view of the Eminent Persons Group, and I think it is a view shared around the entire Commonwealth table, that you cannot have development, you cannot have the abatement of racism, you cannot have fairness and equality of opportunity unless you have democracy and accountability. And that is why our recommendations dealt with that issue of accountability and democracy in a very direct way, made specific recommendations related thereto. And our view is that that is the way for the Commonwealth as a family to progress. The actual relationship between the Commonwealth and the government of Sri Lanka, one of its sovereign member states, is one that I think is, as we approach children next year, very much in development around a series of issues. And I'd be surprised if the issue you raised was not part of that. And in fact, I would argue that it will be better for the government of Sri Lanka, the people of Sri Lanka, all the people of Sri Lanka, and for the Commonwealth if we are frank and open with each other about those issues. I think that would be a far better way to proceed than to look away or to whistle through the graveyard hoping nobody notices.
Any other questions? High Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Senator, for quite a useful presentation this morning. Just a few questions. I know that you focused your attention on the dithering of the Commonwealth and moving forward. But in 2009, when the EPG recommendations of the EPG was formed to go ahead and to seek and advise and to put recommendations in place, the CMAG also had the interministerial team working on recommendations, which you clearly outlined. By 2011, the CMAG reported and accepted recommendations from the interministerial team, put them in place, and actually saw the action of those recommendations bearing out in the New Orleans situation. So you actually saw within 2 years, or just after 2 years, recommendations were brought forward, they were implemented, and you actually saw them in practice. How does that square up with your dithering suggestion? And also, what exactly do you mean by price be paid for a smaller Commonwealth if the price might be worth paying? Whose opinion is that? And
provincial about they didn't take this idea would be unconstructive to the process, and I don't think anybody at the EPG wants to do that.
Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen Cox from the Round Table. First of all, thank you for your speech, which was extremely good and very thought-provoking. I'd like to take this back a little bit. Having been involved in the Commonwealth for longer than I care to remember, and also having worked for organisations where the title of the organisation didn't tell you anything about what the organisation did or stood for, I'm always very conscious of the need, when I meet people, to explain what it is, when we talk about the Commonwealth, what the Commonwealth is, what its vision is for the future, and so on and so forth. And the classic thing is you've got to be able to do that in a lift from the time you get to the first floor to the fourth floor. With many organisations I can do that. With the Commonwealth I've always found that very difficult. It seems to me it tries to do too much. It will be perfectly reasonable for the Commonwealth to say we are a small political organisation with a very highly expert political secretariat, and we operate only at the political level. Perfectly reasonable thing to say. But unfortunately, of course, the reality of the world is that you tend to get things piled on you as soon as you exist of particular issues that people think the Commonwealth should address, and you lose the focus. And so I wonder whether you can, I think you did partly in your speech, at least tell us how we can achieve a shared vision of where the Commonwealth is going. Because I think if we went around this room, we get a different version from everybody. And the shared vision of what the Commonwealth should, how I should describe the Commonwealth in the end.
One of the
short,
yeah, I will. One of the wonders of an organization that is founded on the sovereignty of its members and diversity is that I would be deeply depressed if in a room representing 25 Commonwealth countries there was only one view as to what the Commonwealth should be doing. And the Commonwealth has to be an organization that adapts and goes forward and gets stronger and changes and moderates and modifies based on its own members' wishes, because it's the members who pay for the Commonwealth activity. So the notion that there is always some dynamic of change is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. If I have to summarize the Commonwealth, I would say it's a volunteer family of countries who work together for the common good in governance, human rights, development, and social justice. And we've been doing it for a very long time. And that's what I would say, because that's what I believe it is. You can add 1,000 lines to that, and you can modify. But I think that, and I think it was Her Majesty who said in the Christmas message of 2010, the Commonwealth is not an organization with a mission. The Commonwealth is an organization where people help people across a wide range of nations, every part of the globe, in ways that make a difference to their lives. And, you know, somewhere between that and the strong advocacy, which I think we should take on some of the small p political issues, is where I think the real truth lies.
We have just 3 minutes left, so one final question, and then we'll finish.
Yes. Let's join together. Are there any non-white members of the EPG? And if so, what systems are in place to protect non-white members of the EPG from white supremacist racists?
There were 10 of us on the EPG. Malaysia, Barbados, Jamaica, Uganda, Ghana. So 5 of the 10 were non-white.
Okay.
And thank you, Kiribati. 6 of the 10 were non-white.
6?
Yes, 6 of the 10 were non-white. And insofar as the EPG and its operations were concerned, everyone around the table had equal status, except for our chair, who obviously chaired the meetings. He would have been the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, who's very much non-white. And that became the balance by which we operated. I'm not aware of any constraints put on any one of our members by virtue of what the racial content of their particular circumstance might be.
So what systems are in place?
Well, the EPG's work is finished, but its recommendations going forward with respect to the rule of law, democracy, and human rights is to ensure that the Commonwealth as an organization becomes a system that works against racism in every single part of the world where Commonwealth countries exist. And that is the core of our recommendations if you think about human rights, rule of law, democracy, economic development, and that consistency remains at the core of our activity. And I would argue that while the Commonwealth is not perfect, it has done better on those fronts than other organizations worldwide have been able to. That doesn't mean we should be complacent or self-satisfied. We have a lot of work to do, but I think we have shown immense progress in many areas.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I'm beginning to close up, I'm afraid. I would never normally seek to correct you in public, but it's actually 7 out of 10.
Sorry.
I thought it was an important point. And thank you very much. We do actually like to work our speakers very hard, which is why Hugh will be speaking again tomorrow at the end of our session tomorrow. So he'll be here with us for the next couple of days. So if you have any more questions that you didn't get the opportunity to ask, then you can ask him during the breaks. So we're going to take a very quick 5-minute break. So please use this as an opportunity just to stretch your legs and use the loo. We're going to head to the next session. Thank you very much. And if we could just please thank Senator Hugh Segal in an honest way.